Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Command and Conquer Rivals is the game. And this video is sponsored by EA. And in this video, we're going to talk about some beginner mistakes you might be making by watching some beginner gameplay. There's a replay system in Command and Conquer Rivals where you can watch other people's games. And that means you can watch the very best players, as I did in my last Command and Conquer Rivals video, or you can watch people who are still new and learning the game and maybe figuring some things out. So that said, we're going to go ahead and jump into two different replays here for some low-level people in Bronze League to see if we can learn anything from their playstyles. Okay, so our first game here, we have Speaking Tree versus Pop Ezreal. And I just want to be clear, I'm not sliding these players or calling them out for their mistakes. They're obviously new low-level players in Bronze League, so they're learning. The kinds of mistakes we're going to identify here aren't an indictment on them or an insult to them. We're all at that spot. I made these same sorts of mistakes. If you're new to the game, you will too, but we're just going to use that as an example so that we can all improve. And we can see here, red commits to an early harvester and a couple really cheap units to start contesting the point, whereas blue has yet to build a harvester, but is cranked out 3 different kinds of units. We have a missile squad here that's good against vehicles and air units, but red has yet to actually make either of those. Red here also just drops his special ability, his turret, on a tile that's not actually able to access any blue unit. So that is just going to be a completely wasted 40 Tiberium. It's not going to do any damage. So that is clearly a huge mistake. You need to use that turret in really targeted corridors where you can either hit some unit that's going to help you take a 2-for-1 trade, or block off something of value, or prevent them from holding a point like they want to. So really awkward placement there. And as you can see, it feels to me like both players are essentially just spawning every unit that's available as soon as possible. So they're just making the most expensive thing they can every time they have Tiberium available. They don't seem to be trying to counter or contest what their opponent is doing, which is a huge mistake. The game doesn't get won a single unit at a time by just rapidly deploying them. Sometimes you're much better off making calculated and careful decisions. So, for instance, blue here is making a lot of anti-infantry units when red is spawning all vehicles. Like, blue is not building things that are going to be useful for actually contesting red's units. Also, red has deployed an airship back there to destroy blue's base, so that Orca is going to do some work. And you can see blue spawns another infantry set that's not good at countering red's airships. So blue is essentially not doing anything here to actually contest what red is trying to do. And even though blue took a point and actually fired a missile at red, it's still losing the long game. You can see now those 2 aircrafts are just going to demolish blue's base in no time. And blue is not going to be able to complete the missile in time. The silo is not going to fire. And again, no units to actually counter red's vehicles. Now, I don't know if that's a mistake. Oh, we do see. Okay, so blue finally answers one of the orcas, but not the other one. So that other orca is just going to finish off blue's base in time. So man, this is a chaotic mess, and I feel like I'm probably not doing the best job describing it. But essentially, what it boils down to is, well, first off, blue never built a harvester, so they were always going to be behind in Tiberium. Trying to find, I think, a window to get at least one harvester out is really important if you're not going for a hyper-aggressive style, which blue was not doing. Blue was just kind of deploying units rapidly, but without any sort of rhyme or reason. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't trying to destroy his opponent's harvesters. It wasn't trying to rush their base. So those unit deployments didn't actually do anything. Even though they were rapid, they weren't really for an aggressive playstyle. So defining a game plan is really important. Neither of those players sort of had that I could tell in their loadouts. They weren't really trying to achieve anything so much as just playing the units they had. So even if you don't have access to a ton of stuff, you can still build a cohesive strategy in those early ranks and do things with it. Beyond that, people were just way too focused on playing the first thing they could, deploying a unit immediately instead of trying to get that back and forth rock, paper, scissors style of play where you're countering your opponent's stuff. And then blue also just sort of ignored primary win conditions from red. So here we have an interesting matchup. We have actually both players have made completely simultaneous moves so far. They've done the exact same things up to this point. So that's pretty intriguing. And we can see, wow, this game is crazy. They have mirrored each other almost perfectly, but blue makes one really important diversion here by building a missile squad, presumably to answer that turret. But the unfortunate thing is missile squads are really bad. in this scenario against Red's infantry units. They're not good against infantry, and you don't have to kill the turret. Turrets time out on their own. They will eventually just destroy themselves. They have a clock. So you don't really have to deal with them. You can sort of just ignore them as long as they're not in a high priority point or changing the outcome of the game immediately. So a bit of a strange move there. Also, here we see it again. Blue could just retreat those units on the blue point there away from that turret, but instead tries to like tank it and force it down. It's totally unnecessary to do that, although he did have the Rhino on the bottom point there, which is doing a decent job of answering Red's infantry, certainly. It just wasn't necessary. Again, we're seeing players do things that seem like they should happen, but they don't have to happen. You can have a little bit more patience and make calculated decisions instead of just doing things because they're possible. So reserving your Tiberium, playing units. Again, we see blue tanking Red's turret for no real reason. He could just move those units back by one tile up to the left, and he wouldn't have to deal with that. And that's just an odd mistake. So despite blue having, or Red having, a lower level unit set right now and a lower level base, Red is still able to control the point at this moment and also just make some big time moves over blue just based on strategy and perhaps some poor decisions by blue thus far. Now, this game is far from over, obviously. There's a lot going on, and we have a lot of tanks now doing battle with each other. So this is just barely getting to that point in time. Good awareness and micro there from Red. That's important. So they are just cranking out tanks. Now, see, interestingly, blue right now, he could move that Rhino over to the upper right red tile and really melt those infantry units. That's exactly what that unit is good at doing. So having it parked up there isn't really doing much. You could just use those infantry parked and instead move your vehicle over to the right to not only help you contest the point, because you have 2 units on 1 point, which isn't necessary to control it, but also at that point you'd be able to counter the units there for Red and put them on the back foot so that you're able to control. And it looks like maybe Red's just going to take the point instead. So blue missing a really big opportunity here to use that unit. It's just completely parked. Now blue does finally pull in some aircraft to counter these tanks, because these tanks are not going to be able to answer that aircraft. So finally making a move. And I don't know if we've seen a missile squad or anything to counter this this aircraft from blue. So Red might be in a little bit of trouble here. But look at this. Blue moves his infantry over instead of using that Rhino that's really, really good at answering infantry. So clearly this must come down to essentially a game knowledge gap for blue, where he doesn't realize that his vehicle is really good at countering infantry and that infantry is really weak against his vehicle. Because right now he could just demolish blue's output, or Red's 2 infantry units on the field with that 1 unit. But it must not realize that that is a good counter, and he could exploit or expose that weakness. So instead, just kind of keeping these units camped up there. And I will note that just because he does have these aircraft right now, blue is still, I think, going to be able to pull ahead quite a bit against all of these Red tanks, which just aren't going to go far enough against the aircraft. They're just completely helpless. So Red is going to have to figure out some alternative strategy to counter this. It's certainly not with tanks. Also, not with that Titan he just built, which is a really cool unit, a unit I love using. It has a giant health pool, and it's great against ground vehicles, but completely useless against aircraft. So that is just going to die for free to blue's aircraft. Red does have missile squad, so he could be using these missile squads to very efficiently deal with those aircraft. Incredibly cheap units that are great. And finally, we see him attacking there. If he'd been pumping those out, a while ago, he'd have a much more, a bigger hold on these points, but he'd also be protecting his tanks and his Titans. So I think he should really commit to a mix of those 2 things. Missile squads really do answer quite a bit of blue's arsenal. So they're such cheap units, it would give him a big advantage. Really like to see Red move into those more. And it seems like he's kind of solved that puzzle finally. Moving into missile squad, building a range of things finally here, mixing it up as opposed to committing to one thing at a time. Now, neither player built a second harvester. I feel like there had to be some leftover Tiberium here at some point to gain a bit of a Tiberium advantage, because I think you could really pressure in some big ways. Again, we see those turrets placed in only that one position. Actually, here it does make sense. And Red actually squeaks it out, finally committing to the missile squads. You saw what a turn that was, and that changed the entire outcome of the game. And Red, despite being lower level, despite having similar strategies and mirrors and having lower level units across the board, we saw a lot of matched units there, where they were all lower for red, still via positioning and finally finding the counters actually gets the win. And I think that's pretty cool to see, and a lot to learn from both of those games. You can see a lot of mistakes and a lot of little things happening there to improve upon. So I think those were both very insightful examples we were able to pull up here. So that was a lot of fun, but before I go, there are a few other things I want to say. If you're not familiar with Command & Conquer Rivals, it is a mobile real-time strategy game made by EA's Redwood Studios, who I think have been great stewards of the game so far, doing a lot to support the competitive side of things, but also just keeping an eye on balance and releasing new units. And the game, despite being pretty early in its release, is still being supported really well and doing a lot of cool things. Of course, if you want to check the game out, you can download it using the link in the description below. It is totally free to check out, so I would encourage you to play it, see what you think. You might just find yourself a little addicted like me. I just hit Diamond League. I've been playing a lot of games. I think I played something like 150 matches this week alone. Beyond that, if you want to see more of what is in store for the future of Command & Conquer Rivals, you can head over to the link you'll see next to me on screen on January 12th at 7 p.m. Pacific Standard Time to see a little launch celebration and see what's coming up for Command & Conquer Rivals. Hopefully some exciting things. All that said, I hope you guys enjoyed this look, learned a few little things about the game, and I want to thank you for watching, and until next time, game on.